Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
On this edition of Crime Redefined, we are honored to have as our guest author and former corrections officer Donald DJ Vodicka. In 2009, he wrote the book The Green Wall, a prison guard's struggle to expose the code of silence in the largest prison system in the United States.
After DJ served in the military, he was in only the third class of the Department of Corrections' newly established training academy. After graduating, he rose through the ranks quickly and served in the ISU, or Investigative Services Unit. DJ Vodicka was a prison guard for 16 years, working in California's newest and toughest prisons.
Nothing could have prepared him for what he encountered at Salinas Valley State Prison. The guards had formed their own gang, the Green Wall, complete with gang signs, tattoos, colors, intimidation, and hardcore criminal behavior.
After simply doing his job, trying to maintain the integrity of the institution, DJ's life spiraled downward rapidly when he became the sole whistleblower on this ever-expanding group of rogue prison guards.
DJ Vodicka's book is a chilling look into prison life and the many dangers that DJ encountered while trying to right the wrongs of the California prison system. His story is compelling, important, and moving. Crime Redefined is excited to help spread DJ's message.
DJ, welcome to Crime Redefined.
Thanks, guys. Great. Thanks for inviting me on your show.
To get us warmed up and get the listeners inside your world, DJ, I want to go through some terminology that's unique to prison life and have you talk about the significance and meaning of these terms and a little bit about your personal experiences around them. So the first one, DJ, is fish. What's a fish?
A fish is a rookie officer coming freshly out of the academy that doesn't really know a lot about the prison system inside. It's usually his first day inside of an institution or a county jail or wherever he's at. That's what they usually call a fish. The inmates usually call the prison guards a fish.
Tell us a little bit about when you were a fish. What was that like?
It was a pretty scary experience, coming into a level 4 prison in Corcoran State Prison in California. I mean, I was coming into a prison that most of the inmates were in for life, 85% were life. And it was just a different atmosphere, a different world, coming from a upper middle class family and a nice family and on the outside world, you're coming into a completely different world.
And you got your start in about the mid to late 1980s?
Yeah, I started at Corcoran State Prison in March of 1988. I went to the academy in March of 1988, but I arrived in Corcoran State Prison around May of 1988. All
right, so the next term I wanted to go over with you is SHU and ADSEG.
SHU is a security housing unit. ADSEG is Administrative Segregation Unit. Usually the Administrative Segregation Unit is on the general population yards, the level 1s, 2, 3s, and 4s. And if they commit a crime or assault on a staff member or a battery on an inmate or drugs or any type of criminal activity, even if they are not criminal activity and they just want to lock up because they're afraid to be on the yard, they place them. Every institution has an administrative segregation unit called ADSEG, and they house them there waiting on a possible prosecution from the local district attorney's office for a crime they committed inside the prison. Once they get their crime or the district attorney refers them and they pick up another case, they end up going to the SHU, the security housing unit at another institution where there's a security housing unit. It's a higher level of security.
I see. And in your book, when you were talking about establishing the SHU at one of the prisons, you mentioned that Charles Manson was in the prison that you're at. Tell us a little bit about any encounters you had with him.
Oh, that was an experience. Well, when I was at Corcoran State Prison in 1980, and I was a kitchen officer. I spent 3 years as a kitchen officer. I fed all the inmates in the SHU. I had a kitchen crew of inmates from level 3 that came over and prepared their meals, the morning meals or the evening meals. And then we'd push the food carts over to the SHU units where the officers would actually take the trays off. And the inmates in the SHU are self-fed in their cells. They don't come out and eat at the regular dining table like the general population inmates do. So I had a buddy of mine that worked that unit, and I always wanted to meet Charles Manson. And when I kept on bugging him, hey, Steve, can I come up and see Charlie? I want to see who this Charles Manson is. Yeah, come on up. So one of the days I got some free time after my kitchen was cleaned up, and I went over and met him in the SHU unit, and he took me up on the tier, and it was weird. I went up on the tier with him, and Charlie was facing the back window, and he was in like a sheet draped over him, looked like a toga, and he was facing the back window. And then all of a sudden he turned around real quick, and he came real fast up to the cell where I was at, because the cell had chicken holes, like chicken that's solid steel with holes in it. And he looked at me and his beady black eyes, and he said, "You're a big boy. You're a big corn-fed boy. You from Nebraska?" And I said, No, Charlie, I'm not from Nebraska. And then my buddy Steve interacted with Charlie. He goes, "Nah, Charlie, he's one of my good friends." And he just, with that stare, I'm that beady black eyes, and I'm looking at him, and he has a little swatch between his eyes. But that's the time I got to meet Charlie.
Wow. Now, okay, here's a term you probably didn't want to talk about: gassing.
Oh, that's not a problem. I don't mind talking about gassing. Gassing is basically what happens with the inmates. What they do is they urinate and they defecate in either the toilet or whatever, or in a cup, a paper cup or a pint-sized cup, and they let it ferment for about 1, 2, or 3 days, and let it ferment in the cup, where it gets real thick and muddy looking, but it's actually feces and urine mixed together. So when an officer walks by his cell, and it doesn't have to be an officer that the inmate doesn't like. He might like that officer, but then again, the inmate, you walk by the cell or whatever, and then the inmate throws the feces completely on you, that would hit you head to toe.
How about yard down? What does that mean in prison lingo?
Yard down means is if we have an incident on a yard and the gunner up in the tower is overseeing the yard with us on the yard, because we're outnumbered on the yard. If the gunner sees something out of unusual, or a fight breaks out or something else happens, he'll come out on the intercom and put the yard down. He'll say, "Yard down, yard down." At that time, immediately the inmates are supposed to lay down in a prone position on their stomachs, and their legs crossed and their hands completely out in front of them, and until we resolve the incident.
And in your book, you were talking about the infamous Thanksgiving Day riot, and that there was tear gas being used on the yard. And did I read correctly that the prison guards were not supplied with gas masks?
Back then, in 1998, we were not supplied with gas masks at the time. All we had is our canisters of OC pepper spray, our batons, our handcuffs, and everything else. But we didn't have gas masks at the time in 1998 when that Thanksgiving riot occurred.
Something it sounds like you were involved in quite a bit. Talk to us about what it means to activate a prison.
Activating a prison is usually the institutions pick up their veteran officers, officers who want to transfer to another prison. They laterally transfer to whatever prison is just now becoming open before the inmates get there. We get there about a month before the first inmates arrive, and we help set up policies and procedures. We clean the yards, we sweep the yards, we metal tech the yards to get all the metal or whatever off the yards, because the yards are completely dirt. There's no grass or nothing. So we go on, we put their mattresses in there on the bunks. We get, it's like preparing, like housekeeping, getting it ready for the first bus to come in, and then we're off and running. But we're handpicked. We're handpicked to go down there to activate the prisons. They want seasonal veteran officers, to come down there first before they start bringing in the new academies. Because when the prisons are open, there's usually an academy going on. So once the prison opens up, usually the first wave will have a brand new academy coming in, about 250 prison guards coming in with us seasoned veteran officers.
Wow. And you did that, what, 3 times in your career?
Yeah, Corcoran State Prison is where I activated when I came out of the academy. So there was no inmates at Corcoran State Prison when I got there. And then after that, I stayed there for about 4 years. I was at Corcoran State Prison from 1988 to 1992. And then I went down to Calipatria State Prison down in below El Centro, in the El Centro Brawl area. In 1992, I activated that prison. And then shortly after that, I went up to 2 years. I stayed there 2 years, and I ended up transferring to Pelican Bay State Prison in 1994 to 96. And then there was another prison that activated, Salinas Valley State Prison in Soledad, California. And I applied for that, and I activated that prison prior to the inmates coming to Salinas Valley State Prison, home of the Green Wall.
All right, DJ, next term I wanted to discuss with you is ISU. What does that mean, and what's your experience with that unit?
ISU is the Investigative Services Unit, which is the usually falls into the unit of the Internal Affairs Unit, ISU. And I actually worked at 3 prisons as ISU. My first prison as Investigative Service Unit was at Calipatria State Prison from 1992 to 1994. I was the evidence officer at that prison, where I conducted all the crime scenes on the yards, the stabbings, the gassings, anything that had to do with a crime or anything that I did all the photography and collecting the evidence. After I left Calipatria in 1994, I went to Pelican Bay State Prison, and from 1994 to 96, where I actually was placed back on the ISU unit, Investigative Service Unit. I was the evidence officer at Pelican Bay State Prison. And then after I left Pelican Bay, I transferred to Salinas Valley State Prison on that activation. And the warden at the prison knew all my Investigative Services Unit techniques, and he asked me if I could activate the ISU unit at Salinas Valley State Prison as the evidence officer, and which I did in 1996 until about 1998 by the Thanksgiving riot.
All right, final term in our sort of prison glossary here, and one of the favorites of both Dion and I, fine-tuning.
Fine-tuning. Usually that means when the officers are talking about the inmates, we need to make sure they're fine-tuned and make sure they're following the rules and regulations of the institution, not straying off.
So your book is definitely not funny. It's serious and it's important. But I wanted to read one passage to you that I actually thought was a little bit humorous and then ask you a question about it. So just reading from your book, over 200 inmates worked in the kitchen and nearly all belonged to gangs. Each of the gangs had a specialty area. The Crips chopped vegetables, the MM made sandwiches, and the Aryan brothers and Nazi lowriders washed pots and pans, and nobody got in anyone's face because they were kept apart. DJ, can you kind of break down your thoughts and your techniques that you use to maintain order in such a hardcore prison?
Yeah, that was at Corcoran State Prison when we first housed there. And usually the kitchen sergeant who oversees that kitchen actually establishes where certain races are going to go to work in the kitchens. The Hispanic inmates, the Southern Hispanic inmates love to be in that area where they chopped up vegetables and all that. And the white supremacists and the Aryan Brotherhood and the Nazi lowriders, they always wanted to be in the washing the dishes, the kitchen, and all that. They loved, for some reason, that's where they usually wanted to work. And the Crips and the Bloods, they always picked where they wanted to work. But because you never mixed them or segregated them, put them all together in one area, because you'd have a fight or a war or some type of thing going on in there. Because some of those tables, we had knives on them, and we'd have to actually put a cable through the knife and then lock the knife onto the table. So, when they're cutting vegetables and all that, we didn't want all these knives flying around in the kitchen with all different races.
Yeah, for sure. Now, when you say Southern Hispanics, would that be like a division of the Mexican mafia?
Yeah, they're like basically the Sardaños, the soldiers of the Mexican mafia. They're associated with the Mexican mafia, correct. They're not validated. They're not validated gang members because they have to go through a process to be validated, but they're associated with the Mexican mafia. That's correct.
So, DJ, before the formal training academy opened up in Galt in 1987, how exactly were prison guards prepared for their work?
But well, back when before the academy even existed, I mean, there was not academy back in the 50s or the 60s. Those officers that were hired by the Department of Corrections that wanted a job then were just, they went through a small background check. And they probably took a test, but then they got sent to whatever prison they were hiring them at. And then they just ended up at the front door. And then the prison staff would assign them to a veteran officer to teach them on-the-job training and learn that way. They didn't have badges on their chest. Back then, they only had like a khaki shirt with a patch on each of their sleeves. That's about it. And they were issued, a baton, handcuffs, and they didn't even have pepper spray back then. They had to deal with the inmates one-on-one as they needed.
That's pretty scary. It seems like they weren't even given the tools to deal with the inmates, and maybe that caused them to resort more to brutality simply because they didn't have any of the tools that you guys had later on.
That's correct. I mean, with the tools, all the tools like I remember the big pepper spray, the big canister pepper sprays when I saw were coming in at when I was in Corcoran, 1988 to 90s, and then in the mid 90s there was other devices we've been using, the baton rounds, the gas rounds, the wooden blocks out of the 37 millimeter gas guns that we used on the yards to skip when the inmates were fighting on the concrete yards. We used them. We had to skip them 3 feet in front of them so they actually bounce off and hit them. But they're hard wooden spools.
So let's get into the meat of what your book is about, DJ. Take us back to Thanksgiving Day, 1998. Where were you in your career, and what happened on that fateful day?
Well, I was established seasoned veteran officer. Like I said, I opened up Calipatria State Prison, then I went to Pelican Bay, and then I went to Salinas. And I just recently got off the squad investigative unit at Salinas about 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. And back then, Thanksgiving was a 4-day weekend. Usually the institution is closed. All the administration's not there. And it's just a real low-key minimum staff on the yards. And I was working in the Ad Seg unit down below on D yard at Salinas Valley State Prison. And there was a lieutenant up on the yard named Greg Lewis. He was the correctional lieutenant who I used to work with at Pelican Bay when he was up there. Anyways, we were all getting ready to done feeding the inmates in Ad Seg in the morning, and about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, the upper D yard, we're letting the inmates out to general population to walk the yard or go play handball and all that, just a program on the yard. And all of a sudden we heard alarms going off in the housing unit and all the alarms in the upper yard. And we came outside the door and we heard, inmates the gunners were yelling, prone out, prone out, prone out. And you can see the gas coming over the walls. I mean, we saw gas and smoke running. So we all responded up to that yard because that's what we're trained to do, to respond to help our staff. And as soon as we got up on the yard, the inmates, I witnessed, as soon as I went through the gate, I saw Southern Hispanic inmates running towards staff members and attacking them and hitting them and all that. And the yard gunners were still trying to get control of the yard, and they were laying down rubber baton rounds, and then some of the officers actually fired the Mini 14 at a warning shot. So we put our backs on the walls, and we just allowed the smoke to disseminate, and then we took control of the yard.
And so from that, how then did the Green Wall Gang sort of come to be?
Well, anyways, after that shortly happened, the lieutenant at Greg Lewis asked me, "Hey, Vodicka, do me a favor, DJ, go get the camera equipment out of the control area, and I want you to do the crime scene for me. Would you do that?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely, Greg, I'll do that." And he said, "You do what you've been trained to do, and you do it well, so I won't even have to, micromanage you or whatever." So I said, "No problem, Greg, I'll take care of it." And he said, and Greg Lewis looked at me, he goes, "I want a picture of all the inmates, what they look like prior to them, being escorted back to their housing unit or whatever. I want you to photograph all the inmates from head to toe, head to bottom, because that protects the Department of Corrections and also the officers who are involved, in escorting the inmates back to wherever they need to be." So I set up my camera in a hobby room, which is adjacent to the program office where the sergeants, lieutenants are. I set up my camera equipment in there, and I instructed all the officers, "Hey, when you escort these inmates, bring them to me. I want to take pictures." Well, these two officers that came in with a couple Hispanic inmates, one of them came in and said, What do you do? What the F are you doing, Officer Vodicka? And I looked at him, I said, "I'm doing my job." He goes, "What are you, a freaking inmate lover or what?" And I said, no, you just need to do what you're told. Let me do what I was instructed to do. Those two officers were already associated with the Green Wall from later experienced stuff that's been happening at the institution. They were forming their little Green Wall at the time. And they escorted the inmates back into their housing units. And as they were putting them back in the housing units in their cells, they actually fine-tuned the inmates up a little bit more than what was told. And then later on, within a couple months later, they had big investigators coming down from Sacramento to interview a lot of the people who were associated with the Green Wall. And then they pulled me in and asked me about 2 or 3 hours, because I took all the pictures and they want to know why the inmates were beat up and all that. But they looked at my pictures and they said, these inmates weren't touched when you took the pictures, but when they were sent back to their housing units, they were beat down pretty good.
So DJ, in the California Penal Code, there's a very specific definition for a criminal street gang. And after reading your book, it seems like that would apply to the Green Wall as well. So I wanted to go through the different elements of the definition of a criminal street gang with you and have you kind of describe how the Green Wall might meet that criteria. So the first one is an ongoing organization, association, or group of 3 or more persons, whether formal or informal. How would Green Wall fit that bill?
Right to the T. I mean, they were actually right to that's right to a T on that definition, because they were forming their little group inside the institution, and they started real small members and they grew real big.
And so at the height of it, what percentage of correctional officers do you think were involved in the prison?
I'd say a good between a half and 3/4 of them at that institution at a later date, because they bonded with each other, and they knew when things were going to happen, and they had a tight unit and tight knit ship. And some officers didn't want to do it and didn't want to be a part of it, and they really frowned upon on those officers. They ignored them. They didn't say hi to them. They wouldn't, it felt uncomfortable for certain officers. But some of these officers didn't want to be a part of it, and they treated them pretty badly.
So the second prong in the definition of a criminal street gang is having as one of its primary or consistent and repeated activities the commission of one or more various felonies. How would that apply to Green Wall?
Oh yeah, these guys they would pick and choose, and they would actually commit felonies inside the institution more than once. I mean, it wasn't just one time deal. They did it on several occasions. They committed acts of crime and even felony stuff. Because I remember, and I think it's in my book. There was a promotional for a sergeant in this investigative unit. He's a sergeant to oversee the Green Wall members who were part in there. They actually went out and got a buck knife at a local knife leg. They took it into an engraving shop in Monterey, and they engraved on the blade itself, "Congratulations to your promotion from the 723. The 7th letter of the alphabet is a G, and the 23rd is a W. And it's a felony to bring in that type of a knife inside the institution and to present it to a staff member or anybody. You can't bring a buck knife inside of an institution and not get away with that.
Sure. So what were some of the other felonies that the Green Wall officers were committing in the prison?
Oh, they were assaulting inmates. They were beating down inmates. They would go down to the level 1 yard, the minimum security yard down there, and they would go down there and put fear and intimidation on the inmates. And if inmates looked at them different like that, they take them around the side of the building and fine tune them, beat them up, push them around, throw them against the wall, put them on the ground, destroy their personal property. These guys were quite known of doing this kind of stuff.
So you touched on this already a little bit, but the next part of the definition would be having a common name or common identifying sign or symbol. Tell us a little bit more about how prevalent the 723 was and how they showed their green colors and what kind of hand signals and all of that sort of gang activity.
Right. Shortly after the Thanksgiving riot, it's in my book, but shortly after Thanksgiving riot, all the officers, you can't just wear anything on your green uniform. All you can only wear on your uniform is your patch, your star, your 7-point star, or your patch that identifies that, your nameplate, and your patches on your green jumpsuit. Well, these officers, shortly after the Thanksgiving riot, were wearing turkey pins to identify themselves. They were part of the Thanksgiving riot that, involving the Southern Hispanic inmates. And then shortly after that, they were calling themselves the 723, which the seventh letter of the alphabet is G, the 23rd is W. And sometimes during cell extractions or little gang signs, they would throw up, like a W, like if you grab your thumb and your middle finger and you bring them both together, you look at your index, your ring finger, and the small finger. That if you look at that and you're doing that now, you can see that form of a W. They were throwing the W across their chest or throwing gang signs to each other on the yard to identify who they were. Let them know who they were. That was an ongoing thing. Some of these staff members and officers were actually tattooing 723 on their bodies, and some of them were putting the GW on their calves and all that in green ink. Some of the officers were actually going out and getting tattoos of GW or 723 on their bodies.
Were these tats covered up by their uniform during the day?
Yes, they would be definitely covered up by their pant legs or whatever, but some of them would show, hey, look, this is what I got. I recently got this and all that.
So I want to fast forward a little bit to 2001. And this is a good segue talking about the W hand signal. You were talking in your book about when you were videotaping cell extractions and you actually caught an officer flashing this gang sign on video. Tell us a little bit about that and then how things began to go downhill from there.
Back then, we had some cell extractions. This was like a few months after the Thanksgiving riot and all that. And I was working at SEG still down there in the lower D unit, the same yard where the first Thanksgiving riot happened. Anyways, we had to do some cell extractions. And at the time, there was a captain named Tony Hedgepeth. He was a captain to oversee the cell extractions. Hey, DJ, I want you to be my video guy and video every cell extraction we do. I said, no problem, Tony, I'll do it. So what happens is, we put a cell extraction team together. Usually it's about 4 to 5 guys per team. And you have the shield man, a baton man, a leg iron man, and a handcuff man. And then we have one man that falls behind him to drag the inmate out or bring the inmate out. But each of these officers have to identify themselves on my video camera. Like, I'm so-and-so, I'm the baton, I'm so-and-so, I'm John Doe, I'm the shield man. And it goes to each officer. So there was an officer towards the end who was associated with the green wall. And when he identified himself, he threw that W sign across his chest when he actually said it. He said, I'm so-and-so, and this is what I'm going to do. Well, I caught that on the video, and then I actually told Captain Hedgepeth about it, and he goes, what? He goes, yeah, Tony threw that gang sign. And then they ended up getting the videotape, and he took it up to the warden, who was at the prison at the time, who oversaw the green wall, and he actually told the warden about it, and the warden told Captain Hedgepeth, I want an investigation on that individual. And later on, that individual had an investigation, and he was part of an elite unit, like the SWAT on the streets. We had the CERT inside the institution. They're like our SWAT team inside the prison. And he was let go from that position. And right away, he knew who ratted on him. And he knew that, I'm not going to put up with that's my job. If I see something unusual on a video camera, I'm supposed to report it. And if I don't report it, I'm looking the other way. And I'm just as guilty as that individual is. So I ended up reporting it all the way through the chain of command. And that individual just took it out on me all the way through until I transferred out.
Take us through what was the response of your superiors and the warden when you began reporting this. And I know you had ultimately one of the reports you wrote that was confidential was leaked. Tell us a little bit about that whole process.
Well, the green wall it started in 1998, right there around 98. It grew in 1999 and 2000. It was growing big in the institution at Salinas, and it started getting even bigger and bigger and bigger. And so in 2001, the warden knew that I had knowledge of what these guys were doing, the green wall members what they were doing. And he ended up calling me up to his office one day, and he asked me to come in his office, and he said, Officer Vodicka, are you aware of these people who call themselves the Green Wall? I said, sir, I know knowledge of them. I know what they were doing and what they've been doing over the last couple of years. And he goes, well, you know what, Officer Vodicka, I need a report from you, and I need a report in my office, within the next 24 to 48 hours. And I told the warden, say, I work with these guys, sir. Are you going to protect me or whatever you can do? It says, Officer Vodicka, I need that report. I need it on my desk by Monday. And I need it. I said, okay, fine, sir. I'll do what I have to do. And I called my buddy that I used to work at Pelican Bay, Joe Reynoso, and I told, hey, Joe, he was my squad sergeant. I said, this is what's going on. He goes, DJ, I taught you well. Just do what you're told to do and keep a copy for yourself. Well, I said I went home that night or wherever I was, and I typed it up, a 2-page, 3-page report of everything I knew about what these guys were doing, and I stamped it confidential top and bottom. So I ended up turning it into the warden, and then about 2 months later, I'm down in my vehicle Sallyport, and all of a sudden, these couple of these guys on the green wall, I knew who they were. They drive down in these little golf carts, and I work the vehicle Sallyport is where the vehicles come inside the prison, and I'm the only one where they come in and out. That's the only access. And they drove down to my Sallyport, and they both, a couple of them got off the cart and go, hey, Vodicka, we want to talk to you. Say, oh, something. They went over and they basically quoted verbatim out of my memorandum what I wrote to the warden, and I got thrown under the bus by the warden because the only people who had that report was the warden. Nobody else knew about it. And then from there on, I was being called a rat, a snitch, you're no good, you're through, and that's how it all started with me.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. At that point, after the shit hit the fan, what kinds of threats and intimidation did you have to encounter?
Oh, I was told, hey, don't work the yards. You're a made man. I mean, don't even try to work yards. You're not going to get no backup from us. The officers knew I was a rat. My phone was ringing off the hook in the Sallyport, and every time I answer the phone, you snitch, you rat, and hang up. Because back then we didn't have phones where you can, when the number comes in, where the number was. It's just a regular hard little line phone, and it was just ongoing, and and it just felt uncomfortable. And I didn't really want to work at that prison, and until one night when I lost it, and then a buddy of mine, he's no longer here. He's deceased. He said, DJ, I'm going to get the Inspector General from the state of California to come down and talk to you. Would you be able to talk to him? I said, absolutely, I'll talk to him. So they came out down to my house where I was living in Paso Robles, California, and they ended up coming to my house and asked me if I can go for a ride with them. And I went on a ride for them for about 2 or 3 hours. Well, they tape recorded me and everything like that. And they opened a big can of worms. They put all their stuff together. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, they all swarmed the institution, the Inspector General's office out of Sacramento. They brought a big team of investigators down and didn't even inform me that they were coming. And they just came through the vehicle Sallyport where I was worked, checked their guns and everything. And then they went to their areas where they pulled out computers, logs, everything, and initiated their big investigation. And they left me hanging there. And then soon after that, I had Joe Reynoso get involved, and they transferred me to another prison overnight for my safety.
That was exactly my next question. So it seemed like maybe this was over. You were able to pick where you could transfer to, but what went wrong then at Pleasant Valley?
Well, when I got to Pleasant Valley State Prison, I got there shortly, an overnight transfer, Friday, and I had to report the following Monday. And when I got there, the only people that really knew my situation was the warden's office. Nobody else really knew what was going on. But when I went up to like a little, like in a briefing area, they wanted to talk to me a little bit. Where do you want to work? And one of the captains is a custody captain. He's no longer here. He's deceased too. And he goes, hey, Vodicka, do you want to work in the ISU? And I said, no, I don't want to work in the ISU. I'm done working in the ISU. And then he says, he said, okay, that's cool. That's no problem. And then I ended up working on, he goes, pick wherever you got this seniority. Pick wherever you want to work. Okay, I'll work a D yard. I'll work down a D yard where it's, the less level, general 3 population, and just a programmable yard. And when I was down there for a good few months, one of the lieutenants came up to me, said something to me, hey, I heard you're a rat, and, who you telling on now? And I didn't like what he was saying. And so I sort of put him in check. And then that afternoon, there was an alarm on the yard, and I responded towards the housing unit where the alarm was. And, when an alarm happens in a housing unit, yard officers run to that area to assist other staff. So I was running to the yard door, and the yard door opens up. And as I was running into the yard door, I noticed on my right shoulder, because I had my baton drawn, I didn't see anybody following me be in the housing unit. All the other officers stopped at the door. So when I got into near the housing unit, they were waiting for me to take me out. Somebody was going to take me out inside in that general population area. So I said, I'm done. I'm not working. And I walked off the yard. I had some words with a sergeant. I had some words with a lieutenant. And I went up to the warden's office, and I had some words with the chief deputy warden. I says, you set me up. and I was pretty hostile. And I said, I'm done. And my lawyers at the time and people in Sacramento says, you're done. And that's when my last day of work was, before I had to testify later on in the Senate hearings in California about my case.
So, DJ, when they left you high and dry at that last incident at the prison, you said you were in the general population. Like, how many inmates were around you?
Well, it was the day they were fighting. I remember they were fighting on the day room. It was the blacks and the Mexicans. They were fighting on the day room. It was a staged. I'm pretty sure it was staged, because once I was, if I was going to go through that second door onto the day room, there was an inmate waiting there with a broomstick handle waiting just to take me out. Because the gunner upstairs, he was a cool officer. He said, Vodicka, I'm glad you stopped before you went in, because there was a guy up there ready to take you out. And he backed me up. He wrote a report on that. And I really respected that officer, because he didn't have to do that. He really didn't have to do that, and he did it for me.
So you're telling me that fight was staged specifically to lure you into the area for a possible hit?
Correct.
Wow, unbelievable. So that was the end of your career then as a corrections officer, it sounds like.
Yeah, I definitely went out on stress on that. I said, I can't go anywhere. And then my legal team, my lawyer, and who was Lanny Tron, he's a lawyer out of Camarillo, California, Lanny Tron. And I contacted him. He says, you're done. I don't want you going to work anymore in the prisons. Come down and see me in Camarillo. When you get a chance, we'll talk what our next step is. And then shortly after that, the Department of Corrections intervened. They sent their legal team down to where Lanny's law office was down in Camarillo. And they wanted to meet with me to see if they can get me go back into the Department of Corrections and like in paroles or somewhere outside the institution. And then Lanny asked the lawyers and all that. I was sitting at the table. Lanny goes, can you guarantee my client's protection wherever he goes? And the Department of Corrections, I remember the lawyer saying, we can't guarantee that, Mr. Tron or Mr. Vodicka. So my lawyer said, well, we'll just see you in court later on. And then in January, I don't know if you guys are going to talk about this, in January 21st of 2004, I was subpoenaed to the state capitol in front of Senators Jackie Spear and Gloria Romero, who was the oversight committee hearing against the Department of Corrections and about the code of silence, how powerful the code of silence was existing in the Department of Corrections. And they wanted to get to the bottom of it. And they requested my presence to share my story at the hearing.
So I want to go backwards really quick, and then we'll talk more about the Senate testimony. But if you don't mind sharing with us, there was an incident in 2003 when you were at the Mid-State Fair in Paso Robles with your son. What went down?
That's hard for me to talk about.
All right, it's okay. If you want to talk about that,
I'll talk about it. My wife's coaching me, which is great. My little boy, I have a little boy that I don't want to talk about where he's at and all that, but
right, absolutely.
He wanted to go to a mid-state fair in Paso Robles, and my parents were down in the Pismo Beach area. He goes, Daddy, can you take me to that fair? And he was like 5 years old at the time. And so, yeah, son, I'll take you. And I ended up going to the fair, enjoying the fair with him and having a great time. And then as the fair was closing, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, I had my son by my hand, and I was walking outside the fair, and there was a sergeant that was sitting on the bench outside the fair with his wife, and he was pretty intoxicated. And he jumped up right away and approached me right away and startled me and goes, "Hey, Vodicka, you need to drop this case with the green wall. Let it go." And then it startled me, and my little boy was on my right and started crying. And I got him out of there right away, and he didn't really get a chance to see my parents, and took him back to where he was living up in Oregon for his safety, and I got out of the area.
That is absolutely horrendous. And I apologize for asking you that, and I appreciate you for sharing it, but I just wanted to illustrate to the listeners how bad it got and how much of an impact this was on you beyond just losing your career, on the personal level as well.
Yeah, that's my goal. I mean, my whole thing was to protect my family and protect me. And, when all this happened, guys, I thought I had a lot of close friends in the Department of Corrections that I could trust, and well, they all turned their backs on me except for one person, and that was Joe Reynoso. He's been my friend ever since, and He's always will be my friend. He always watch out for me. We're still good personal friends. And Lanny Tron, he's my attorney in California and Camarillo, and he calls me every once in a while and checks on me. But when you break the code of silence and you turn against your own, it's the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. And I'd do it all over again, because it's all about the badge. We wear a badge for a reason, and that's what we wear it for a reason. We don't sentence the inmates. The court sentences the inmates, and we're supposed to oversee and watch over and protect them, make sure, they get what they got coming. And it's all about humanity. I mean, nowadays it's all about prison reform, and humanity is a big thing, and that's how I was raised.
So we talked a little bit about the California Senate testimony. Let's go to after that. What was the aftermath of the testimony for you? I mean, what did life look like after you gave that testimony?
Wow. After I shortly testified at the Senate hearings, when I testified at the Senate hearing, it was a packed house. There was 4 or 5 senators sitting above. There was the director of corrections was there, Rod Hickman. He actually, the secretary of corrections, Rod Hickman, he was my captain on the squad at Calipad. He knows I was a straight up type of guy. He was a captain. He was a secretary of corrections, oversees all the corrections. He was there. The union was there. And everybody was there. And I back up a little bit. I tried to reach out to my union, who was very powerful, CCCPOA in California. And I tried to reach out to him when I transferred to Pleasant Valley overnight. The chapter president, Mike Jimenez, came up to me one day. And when I was over there, I said, "Hey, Mike, I've been trying to get a hold of you in your office." And he looked at me and he looked at my nameplate and he goes, "Oh, you're Officer Vodicka. I've been advised not to talk to you." And he walked away from me. He wouldn't talk to me, because they're the ones that protect the Green Wall members. They're the ones that give them everything they need, for lawyers and everything else. But they wouldn't even have a time of day. He told me to go out and get my own attorney. But shortly after I testified in the Senate hearings, I was up there for about 2 hours talking about it. And when I testified that day in January, it hit the front page of the LA Times, and it was all over my story and everything when I testified. I didn't even know until the next day. But shortly after I testified, I remember getting in a vehicle with Joe Reynoso and a couple other people, and they ended up taking me way up in Northern California, off the grid, and then into a hiding area for 6 months, way off the grid in the backwoods. And a little scary feeling when you're going back off the pavement, off the dirt, off through lock gates into dirt, and in an isolated area. The only thing back there was a cabin, and it had no electricity, had propane. No running water, and that's where I sat for about 4 or 5 months until stuff started dying down.
Was it nice not having some of those distractions, living simply, or did that make it harder?
It has up and downs. I mean, I was scared because I'm going to an area that I'm not familiar with, and I don't know where I'm at. But I knew exactly, the geographical area where it's at, but not knowing where this cabin is. It's a spooky little thing. You're in between two canyons, and just there's a front cabin and a back cabin. The front cabin was a lady that knew some people in the Department of Corrections, and Department of Corrections they used this area to house protect other witnesses against the Department of Corrections. And she was a nice lady. She is no longer with us either. She passed away a few years ago, and it's a pretty area, isolated area, gorgeous area. But I'm glad they took me up there, because there was a lot going on. I mean, there was a lot of threats going on. Let's find Officer Vodicka. And it's not the inmates and the convicts that hated me. They appreciated what I did. It's the staff members, because there's the ones I wasn't scared of, because they're the ones can get to me at any time.
Yeah. Isn't that ironic? I mean, you should be worrying about the inmates, you would think.
Right. The inmates, from what I understood, is because my lawyer, Lanny Tron, he was telling me, DJ, I was getting flocked with these letters in my mailbox, and they were thanking for me and what you and me did, and went in to testify, and they were so thankful for what I did, and to this day, I think they're still thankful, because I opened up a can of worms. I changed my story, guys. Changed policies and procedures in the Department of Corrections. They revamped. There was no code of silence training in the Department of Corrections. Now they had mandatory training once a year. I changed a Senate bill. There was a Senate bill passed with my case, and and protection of whistleblowers. There was never anything in the Department of Corrections to protect whistleblowers until my case came to light. And nowadays it's officers are doing this they're doing it and they're going to get terminated, from what I understand.
So was there actually 2 bills that you were responsible for?
Yeah, there was a Senate bill passed to protect whistleblowers in the Department of Corrections, whistleblowers who wanted to come forward to protect them. There was a Senate bill passed. Senator Romero and Senator Spear, shortly after I testified, one of their aides sent me an email saying, hey, based on your story and what you did and what you went through, both senators submitted a Senate bill for people like you in the Department of Corrections who are whistleblowers to come forward and to be protected from fear and retaliation. So that was initiated and actually got put through.
Well, that's definitely an awesome legacy.
And then, there's another person I want to reach out to and say there's a special judge, senior federal judge, Judge Henderson. He's up in the federal courts in San Francisco who put the Department of Corrections in receivership on the medical side. And he was about to put the Department of Corrections in receivership over all guards and all that because of the code of silence and the big Mikey Powers and Jose Garcia case they were involved up in Pelican Bay and the Madrid case and all that. He was following my case closely, him and John Hager, who was a special master at the time. And I think you saw it in the book. In the book, he wrote a real nice memorandum for me, and I really respect him for what he did.
Are you still involved or sort of an activist in prison reform today?
Not really. I haven't got a chance to get involved in it, but I would like to try to get involved in it, in some type of aspect in that. But I'll let you guys know there is a feature film in the makings regarding my story, and hopefully maybe that'll come out very soon to show the viewers and the world and people in California that how corrupt it is behind the walls in the Department of Corrections, and because the media doesn't get to see what goes behind the walls inside the prison system. They only see what they want. They only see what they want to see. They don't allow the media to come in and see dirty prison guards or officers that are doing the illegal activity. And just to let you guys know, I don't know if you know or not, but about a year ago, I was contacted by a lawyer up from the Sacramento area who's representing some inmates at San Diego and RJD. And the green wall resurfaced again down there because some of the inmates were fine-tuned by the officers down there, and the officers were flashing gang signs. That's the green wall, and actually tell them, hey, we're the green wall. We'll do what we want to do.
Oh, boy. So, but this time around, do you think because there were some procedures in place to deal with it, do you think that got squashed pretty quickly when the green wall reared its head, or how was it dealt with?
I think after I testified and all that, and it went underground. It went underground for a long time, for a few years, and then shortly after that, it resurfaced again because it's a lot of officers, and I read articles, and sometimes I see inmates reading articles in different prisons say they've been attacked by the green wall members, and they're throwing green wall at different prisons, but they were real heavy at Donovan State Prison about a year ago.
That's exciting news about the movie. And I wanted to ask you, how have the sales of your book been?
The sales, it's a hit and miss because I self-published the book, and back then my lawyer, I've never wrote a book before, and it's based on a true story, and there's everything in that book. I have solid evidence and factual evidence, and everything in that book is solid. And my lawyer said, "Why don't you keep the book for your own rights? You own the rights. Nobody can do anything with that book unless you want them to." But I just recently, about a month or 2 months ago, there was a production company out of LA, and I don't want to mention her name yet because she doesn't want me to yet, but she very highly about people who tell the truth, and she says this needs to be told, DJ. I mean, your story it needs to be told, and we need to get to the bottom of this, and I foresee it when it comes out. It's going to be a good feature film because it's the truth about what happens in the California corrections in California, and people who live out there are paying taxes to, a lot of heavy money going to taxes to the prison system.
Yeah, I mean, your book is absolutely shocking and disturbing, and may I just say, very, very well done. I mean, it's a very enjoyable read as well.
And guys, it was sort of hard because my father, before he passed away, said, you need to share your book, write your book, That was his last words to me. He said, "Write your book and share it with the world. Son, they did a number on you, son. They really put you through hell. And why don't you put it in writing? And you've got all the information, son. Just put it in writing and move on with your life. You need to share it with people that don't know the knowledge of what happens behind the walls." And when I got home, shortly after I got home, my wife said, "Hey, honey, listen to what your father said, and go in that room and start typing, because you have all the documents. You've got all the documents and evidence to support it. It's my story. It's my story." And it was sort of therapy for me a little bit, because I got to talk about it. I got to talk about it, but it took me about 2.5 years to put it all together, and it was a longer book, longer pages, but I had an editor edit, and they wanted to get right to the nitty gritty instead of the boring stuff. So here I am. The book's been out for about 10 years. I published it in October of 2009, and here we are, 2019, and it does pretty good on the Amazon ranking sales. I wish it would take. I wish they get recognition. I'm glad you guys are sharing this story and my story on your podcast, because it's a story that needs to be told, and I hope everybody reaches out and grabs the book and reads it, because there's nothing in that book is a lie. Everything in that book is solid.
Well, final question, DJ, and the most important one. How are you doing today after all of this? Has the dust settled?
I think about what happened. At the first 5, 6, 7 years, it was brutal, and with my wife helped me out a lot, get me through this stuff and trying to take my mind off of things because of the passing of my mom and dad and not having family members. I have a family member that doesn't reach out to me anymore because I wrote the book, and he's my only family member. And that's tough, not seeing my only family member, but I'm getting through. But there's little things that touch me, like my son's my life, and my wife's my life. And I get through it, but nothing like it was when it first started. I was a wreck, but I was on meds. I've been on meds because I had a workman's comp case. And when I was going through the workman's comp case, when I was coming from out of state into California, I was escorted by the California Highway Patrol to the courthouse. And when I was at the courthouse, the judge, looked over, who ordered the California Highway Patrol to be inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom when I'm there. And then they put me back. I got back on the road, and they followed me out on the highway to way out where I wasn't being followed, and I headed home back out of state. But with my vest, I always had a bulletproof vest on when I went into California, because I don't know who's going to take me out.
Right, absolutely. Are you still kind of living like that? How cautious do you have to be to this day?
Where I'm out. I don't live near California. I live pretty far from California, in areas of California, but I am. I always have my guard on, hey, Vodicka, or weren't you a prison guard? Nobody said that yet, but my radar's on, but not as bad as it was at the beginning.
Well, DJ, thank you so much for your time today. I know this was a tough interview, but man, this is a compelling story, and we're going to encourage all of our listeners to read the book, and we're going to promote this on social media. And, you've brought after coming through all this, you've brought about some good change with the bills and all of that. So, hats off to you. You're really a trooper for surviving this and thriving.
Oh yeah. The other thing I forgot to tell you guys, my book is banned into going into the California Department of Corrections. They won't allow my book to go into the inmates so the inmates can read it.
Figures. But in the book, wow.
Yeah, my book has nothing about threats against officers or how to break out of prison, all that. It's just the truth about what these officers done to all these inmates. And they've actually banned my book from going inside the state prison in California, which I just don't understand why. But I can actually see a reason why, because the inmates would probably get pissed off and probably turn against the guards. But they've actually banned my book from going in. And then, I'm sort of excited about getting this out to a feature, to have a feature film on it if it goes out right, because it needs to be told. It really does.
Whoa, man, Mehul, I don't think either one of us expected that interview to be so intense.
You are correct. That was very disturbing indeed. And I thought that DJ just did a really stellar job of detailing his compelling story. What were your takeaways, Dion?
Well, actually, on that note, he did do a great job detailing his story. And that's what I think I enjoyed most was his consistency. Obviously, we did our research on him, and whether it was a YouTube video or reading his book, everything was very consistent based on what we heard in his interview. I also took away that DJ is a very honorable man. All he wanted to do was wear the badge and do his job. And you can also hear in his voice that this whole thing almost broke him.
Yeah, he is definitely a straight shooter and an excellent storyteller. And we look forward to seeing more of DJ and his story in the media. And we really can't encourage our listeners enough to go out and get this book.
Yes, and you can get DJ's book about the Green Wall at Amazon.com and all sorts of sites online. Just Google it. And you can also follow DJ on Twitter at StandingAlone48. And as always, a big thanks to our listeners and social media followers. We hope that you were moved by DJ's story and enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to subscribe to Crime Redefined. Why would you want to risk missing an episode?
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.